Now I'd like to open the conversation up to any questions or discussions.
I'm not asking a question. I'm the roving mic. Anyone got any questions?
Right, can I go home then?
I've got a quick question.
Hi, Bronwyn. Hey, one of your comments was around streamlining local commissioning, and you believe that going local will save time and more efficient processes and less tick boxes. And wouldn't it be a lot more efficient to have one contract for a service that could be rolled out, and so that we're not having 20 DHBs making X number of different deals with the local pharmacies? And second to that, I've went to different DHB areas because our area covers a multitude of areas, and the interpretation of local commissioning was so vastly different between the areas. One DHB representative actually told me that it was a lever they could pull to close certain particular pharmacies down. And then in another area, they'd be horrified to think that that's how it would be used or interpreted. So how will you clarify that to the extent that we can actually be confident that we will grow in services, and that the process for running new services, which is what we're all about, will actually be improved and will be open and efficient and equitable? Yeah.
So can I start at the beginning of that? Because there is always this tension between what you do nationally and what you do locally. If we're going to address the equity issues in New Zealand, we need to do a lot more locally. And all of the evidence everywhere in the world will tell you that. If you're going to integrate health services, if you're going to get alignment between general practice, aged residential care, the NGO sector and the local hospital, you've got to do it locally. What we're proposing here is a national framework that allows local work to happen as well. So it's analogous to the PHO agreement. The PHO, the Primary Health Agreement, is largely national, but there is elements of that where services are nationally, the expectation is you'll deliver services to high need populations. How you do that locally is quite different. So each DHB has worked with its local PHOs to develop a different suite of services that best meet the need of their population. In some large DHBs, they may even be different services by PHO. But that's about being able to customise what you do for the local population and the context of that population and what other services are available in the area. So do I think everything should be national? No. Do I think everything should be local? No. I think there's a continuum. That's about where we get the balance. Now the other question was how we're going to make sure it's equitable. You're right. There's variation amongst the 20 DHBs. What we're proposing here over the next month or so as we work is we get the processes by which DHBs will undertake local commissioning defined, so that you've got a template to follow.
Any other questions?
Well, that was easy. You're not allowed to ask questions, Andy.
Well, no, I think I can because I was invited. But I just wonder, listening to that, whether it would be useful explaining how Care Plus and the flexible funding pool work through local alliances, and so how they're framed up in the contract nationally, and then what can be done with them.
So how the national contract is framed up is there's a allocative mechanism for determining how much is available in a particular district health board or for a particular PHO based on the enrolled population. It defines in the contract the expectations of the outcomes of those services. So the expectations that for a portion of those services are targeted at high needs populations, that a portion of those services are about health promotion, so getting ahead of the game, and a portion of those services are specifically for about enhancing access for populations that have more difficulty at access. How that comes together and how that's packaged up is quite different. So locally, for example, the 3 PHOs in Canterbury along with the Canterbury District Health Board have agreed an enhanced capitation type model. So we allocate that money to collectively to each of the general practices based on their enrolled population, but not according to the normal capitation formula, to one that we've developed that best reflects the high needs populations in Canterbury. Other PHOs have particular health promotion services they run. They might have smoking cessation. Services to improve access can be done as vouchers. There's a whole range of things that are done up and down the country using that money. And that's where we're kind to get to, because the opportunity here is to actually get, as Rachel was saying earlier, get the people with Care Plus in the room with the people with long-term conditions and say, how can we join this up and deliver a coherent, integrated service for the most vulnerable people we have? Yes, Alison.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. I was really pleased to hear, moving away from the tick box and more clinical focus on people-centred care. I suppose I have one question. When you showed the map of the DHBs, particularly around LTC, I think it would be very useful to understand for future take-up with services as to why the Waira wrapper specifically is way above that national average, and why Whanganui is well below that national average. So I think those considerations, and I'm not asking for the answers as to why that is, but I think it's really important to understand that around behaviours as we move forward into services and how that would inform them.
I think you're absolutely right, Alison. That's
what's working
and what's not.
Yeah.
And that's part of coming back to Bronwyn's question. The 20 DHBs are working together on this. We're supported by the Central TAS team. We are quite committed to the idea that we learn off each other. So again, it's about where it works well, we'll generalise it. Where it doesn't work, we won't do that again. So it is a little bit about constantly learning, but picking the services that are most relevant to our populations.
And the quality delivery of those.
Yes, the quality. Thank you, Alison. The quality delivery, because a lot of the current conversations about volume, and we'd like to move into how we're making a difference for our patients.
Drula.
Thank you. Just one little bit on the service delivery or the service development. So if every local DHB is deciding on services, for example, the smoking cessation, is there a need to develop every service locally as well?
No.
Because the structure should be pretty much the same, and I think smoking cessation was redone 20 times. So from that perspective as well, as a profession, if we're working to one service as well, we're working, it's hard to cross-learn.
So again, I think it's a little bit like the answer to Bronwyn's question. There's a continuum here, and totally agree with you. That's one of the reasons we have the expert advisory group, who are to provide advice as to how these services should be delivered and constructed. And it's also it's the same learnings we've had with processes like health pathways, where generally speaking everybody does some stuff largely the same, but there is still an element of local variation, which is about the context and about the resources that are available. So I think it's getting that balance right between this is how these services ought to be delivered to that this is how we're going to deliver them in Canterbury, for example. And I think it is another continuum thing. And we probably would have failed if we end up designing services 20 times over in different ways. And that isn't the direction the DHBs are collectively talking about, is it, Kevin? The CEs in particular are having conversations about how we can better learn off each other. Cool.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you've emphasised a journey, and I suspect there's a lot to be achieved in the next 3 months, and the contract after that's not going to go that far into the future. I'm assuming you've also thought about what it might not cover in that next contract, and therefore what is the next part of the journey. Obviously, in helping confidence on this next part of the journey, having some thinking about what's after this part would be useful as well, in terms of giving confidence of what it's not going to cover but will need to be covered further down the journey at the right time. I think I didn't quite hear it in your process, but I'm sure you've thought of it.
Oh, thank you, Michael. No, you're right, you didn't hear it in the presentation. That's part of the work, for example, that the expert advisory group, so they actually have a roadmap of where they're going in terms of development over time, opportunities for new services, where we're going in terms of acute services, and there's a whole range of things sitting on that roadmap. So as we carry on these conversations over the next month and a bit, I think you're right, we should be bringing that roadmap to the table so that people can actually see these, because part of what that does is paints the opportunity, which is, you know, where are we going in the future. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the question. Are there any other questions, or can we go home early? Thanks, Andrew.
Not really a question, but look, thanks Kevin, thanks Carolyn for bringing us up to speed with what's happened post consultation. Obviously keeping the conversation going is something that we as sector agents absolutely want to do, and so we're really looking forward to that opportunity to sort of flesh some of these details out. Obviously there's some hard work ahead, so I guess we're going to have to get cracking, but look, just thanks for bringing us all up to speed. I found that useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And yes, you can see why we did the 3-month extension. There's a lot of work to be done to get from what was really to borrow one of Rachel's expressions, a wet paint contract, into something that better reflects the feedback we've got from the sector. Well, you've thought of something, Richard.
Thanks, Carolyn. Kevin. Just like to say that looking at the consultations and the feedback, I think you've picked the right ones. And I think there is some huge opportunities that will need to be talked about over the next month and a half pretty damn quickly. The idea of national guidelines and flexibility of local commissioning, that's exactly where the profession sees the development of itself. Yep. So.
Thanks, Richard. And I think the important thing is the journey word, and that we won't have all of the detail, but we'll have the enabling clauses. So the idea behind this contract is to have the process clear and have the enabling clauses in place.